Hey everyone. So today I just want to go over something that comes up a lot. It seems like every time I post some photos, someone inevitably asks, what camera I'm using, what my settings are, that kind of thing. So, there's the equipment you use and the settings on that equipment. That's just one part of it. Um, One very important part of the picture here is the software that I use to, quote unquote, develop those photos. I only shoot in RAW. I say that all the time. I don't shoot in JPEG, and there's a good reason for that. When you shoot in JPEG, the camera is applying settings within its own software to that image that you take, like saturation, contrast, sharpening, etc. And you don't have any control over these settings. Right? The camera is applying these settings for you, making decisions for you, and that's just not something I like. I like to make these decisions myself. So what I do is I shoot in RAW, and then all images are downloaded to Adobe Lightroom. I love Adobe Lightroom. It's a great piece of software, not only for developing your images, but also for organizing. So if you look at the screen here, on the left side, when you have Lightroom open, are these are all my different shoots. If I go out with the kids for a day, which is actually what we're looking at right now, is all my kid shots. Come home, open up Lightroom, stick in the memory card, and I'll tell it to create a new folder that I name with the date and name of the shoot. So if we went to the zoo, it'll be today's date, zoo, or kids at the zoo, and then everything gets downloaded to that folder. And then I can always come back to this folder. So, this is the folder for my kids for the year. I just kind of dump all miscellaneous kid shots in this folder every time I take some. Here's some pictures of the new Jeep. I got some photos of my house that I've been working on, and of course the tank. So right here we can see I've got a 2016 Elos Reef. Every shot I take for the year gets downloaded into this photo. Next year I'll start a new folder. It's just an easy way for me to organize it. You might find a better way. But anyway, what you want to see here today is what I do with the images when I download them. So what I'm going to do here is scroll down along the bottom. They call this the film strip. All right, and just drag this bar, and you get to see every photo in this folder or in this shoot. So I'm gonna go and find a recent image that could use some work. So let's see. I took some shots of the fish. And these are some I developed already. Let's see. Here's a good one. Okay, so this is an image. I already made a copy of it. If you look down at the bottom here, this was the original, and I told Adobe Lightroom to make a copy. And this is the great thing about shooting in RAW and using Lightroom is that you never lose the original RAW file. You can make as many changes as you want. You can make as many copies as you want. Lightroom doesn't actually create a separate image in a separate file on your computer. What it does is it just kind of holds those instructions in memory. And it's not until you export your image out of Lightroom that it applies all those settings and creates your file. So you can just go to town and make as many different versions as you want, and you're not increasing or not taking up more storage on your computer, which is great. So let's see. We'll start here. All right. So this is the image. It's okay. It's in focus. It's just a little. It's kind of drab looking. And that's the thing about a raw file. It's your negative. It's your digital negative. Right? Like I said before, with JPEG, none of those settings are applied. So there's been no saturation, no contrast, no sharpening. Nothing's been applied to this image yet. So what we're going to do is go up top. Right now we're in the library panel. library is what I was showing you over here on the left of all your different shoots. What we want to do is go into develop. Okay, now you can see the information and the panels on the sides have changed. And we can kind of scroll down here and you see that we've got tons of different settings that we can mess with. We've already started with a pretty decent image, so I would say this is pretty much exposed. Exposure here is pretty good. It might be slightly on the dark side, but I think we're all right. We might mess with that a little bit later. But what I do is I kind of start up here in the top. And then the first thing, really, probably the thing that most people have issues with is white balance. So just to give a little background on this shot, I shot with the highest white balance that my Nikon will let me, which is 10,000 Kelvin. And the lights, I have Radeon G4 Pros. Those were set to a more white, probably like around a 14,000 K white balance. Whenever I take shots, I really try to to bring up the white channels on my lights. It just makes things so much easier. You try to shoot with your lights when they're really blue, and it's just very difficult for the camera to capture what you're seeing. So start more neutral, start with more white. Take the shot with a higher white balance around 10,000 K. Your camera might go up higher to 12,000, 14,000. You can kind of play with it. But as it comes in here, to me, it's still a little too blue. So what I like to do is come over here to the temp slider, and I'm just going to kind of move this so you can see what happens if I go to the left, the image gets more blue. If I bring it to the right, it gets a lot more yellow. So we started with this image around here, and I'm going to take it and give it a little more warmth, a little more yellow. You can see how, especially in the whites, the underneath of the fish, see how when I bring it to the right, it just kind of really warms it up and makes it a little more neutral, less blue. I think that looks all right. Below the temp is a tint slider. This is going to give you a range of an extra color tint over the image between somewhere between green and magenta. For whatever reason, the camera recorded the image and brought it into Lightroom, and then there's a positive 24 on the magenta side. I'm not sure why it does that, but I'm just going to bring it back down a little bit closer to 0, because I really don't want any extra tint either way. So let's just put it right around 0 or close to it. Okay, so there we go. I think the image still looks kind of flat, but color-wise, we're pretty much there. So the next thing I like to do is come down a little bit further to clarity. Clarity is kind of your contrast, but more in the mid-range. So you see, if I bring it all the way to the left, the image just kind of gets real soft looking. And if I bring it way up here, it's just really kind of more dark and contrasty, and there's more structure to it. So I just like to add just a little bit, maybe around 20, 25. It kind of depends on the image. And then down below that, it kind of, obvious, everybody knows what saturation does. So I always give the image a little boost. Sometimes it's only about 10, maybe a little more. Just kind of play with it until I get something that I think looks like what I'm seeing when I look at the tank. Vibrance is similar to saturation. I like to give that just a little boost. I tend to keep them a little bit even. Sometimes, saturation is just a little bit under the saturation. So again, color is starting to look better. I still think the image could use a little punch in the kind of more in the contrast area. I don't know why, but I usually don't mess around too much with an actual contrast slider. You can play with this. Maybe I'll just give it just a little bit, tiny bit there. what I tend to like to do is play with this curve. And I'll do is I'll give it a little bit of an S curve, but I can do that by taking the lights slider, and this is going to increase the lighter portions of the image and make them even lighter and brighter if I move it to the right. And I'm really paying attention to the white areas in the image and making sure they don't get too blown out. So if you look here around the gills of the fish, that's kind of my brightest area. And if I go too bright, I'm starting to lose detail, and obviously it just looks a little overexposed in those areas. So I just want to give it a little punch, just bring the lights up a little, and then the shadow areas, I might just want to kind of go a little darker on those. So now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, I don't know, maybe, you know, kind of in the mid-tone areas, we're getting a little dark still. Maybe we could actually bring the exposure up just a little bit on this image. And when I'm shooting, you always want, if you're going to err on one side or the other as far as exposure goes, go a little bit darker. If you overexpose, it's harder to bring back the details that you lost. If you underexpose, it's much easier to bring up the exposure, and then you'll see those details in the shadows and everything come out. So I'm just going to brighten this up just a little bit. All right. So let's go back here. Let's look at the original image. I come back down to the film roll down here, and I can click on that original copy, and you can see that what a difference we've made already. See how dull it looked before, and this is how bright it is. Now, something else that the Lightroom does, which is nice, is it has settings for many lenses that are out there. So I'm using a Nikon 105mm macro for this shot. And if I come down, say we were way up here at the top for the develop settings. If I scroll down here, there was a lens correction panel. And if I just click enable profile corrections, it applies settings to correct for issues that particular lens might have. So watch the corners of the image. When I turn this off, the corners got a little darker. So there's a little vignetting with this lens that Lightroom will automatically correct for. And it appears that that's really the only thing that it's correcting for with this lens. Other lenses might have parallax issues and lens distortion issues, and Lightroom will try to correct for that automatically. So because it's actually even brightening up the edges of the image here a little bit, this is probably really one of the first things you should do when you open up the image, but it's fine. We've got to click now, and it didn't make too much of a difference. Some other things that I'll play with a little bit here is the sharpening. Again, no sharpening had been applied to the image because it was raw, so Lightroom does apply a very minimal amount when it brings the image in. I usually like to add just a little bit more. It's going to be very hard to see a difference here, but there is a slight difference. Noise reduction, there's not much of a noise issue with this image, so I'm probably just going to leave that alone. If you shot at a really high ISO and the image was a little underexposed, you might have some noise going on, and so you can play with this slider here, and it'll help reduce that noise. And that's pretty much it. This image is basically ready to go. Only other thing that sometimes I like to play with a little bit is maybe add a little more impact to the image. You can play with the vignetting. So even though the lens correction corrected for that vignetting, sometimes I want that vignetting. I want to bring the viewer's eye more to the center of the image. So You can play with this a little bit. You can change the amount of vignetting. You can change the midpoint, kind of, how it blends from the outside to the interior. It can be kind of cool. Let's play with that. Let's leave that. Since there's nothing really going on in the outside edges of the image, I kind of like that. Now we can also crop. We got a lot of dead space, and sometimes there's nothing nothing wrong with that. But let's come up here. This icon right here at the top is our crop, and it'll pop up some handles. And by holding the Shift key and dragging, it'll keep the same proportion. And it'll crop out this image. And I think that looks kind of nice. And then by just double clicking, it'll apply those settings. There we go. And what it did was it took any effects like the vignetting that's here, and it re-centered it and reapplied it to the new crop. Now, if I really wanted to kind of get into the details here, and I don't know, let's say I thought there was, I don't know, too much magenta in the reds, and I wanted, this is looking a little too pink to me, and I want to warm it up and bring more yellow in. There's a panel right here that lets you play with the colors. And I can selectively choose, say, just the reds, and I can change the saturation. I can change the actual color. I can change the luminance, which is dark to light. So in this case, let's play around so I can show you. Let's take the reds, and I'm going to make the reds more yellow. And you can see where it's doing this is it's picking up what it considers red right more around the edges of the yellow stripe. And it's not quite what I want to do. So what I'm going to do is come down to the bottom where it's magenta, and I'm going to change the magenta. Let's go more red. You can see how that's adding a little more red, less of that kind of purple pink. So, this is not something I usually play with, but I just kind of wanted to show you what you can do. But that's really it. These are your basic settings, the kind of things I do with every image. Just, I come to the top, first thing I do is to fix the white balance, and I come down, a little clarity, maybe, add this bit of an S-curve, and saturation, of course. And that's it. And you can see that I'm not really doing a lot. It's very small adjustments. Probably the largest adjustment I'm going to make is to the white balance, depending on the lighting that I had over the tank when I took the image. But everything else is pretty minor. Just a little extra contrast, a little saturation, and that's it. But going back to the original, you can see those little adjustments really make a huge difference. And the cool thing is that we made all the choices ourselves. We didn't let the camera do it. So now the only thing that's left that really bothers me about this image, and this happens a lot when we're shooting a tank, is all this junk floating through the water. That always bothers me, and I really want to get rid of this. You can use Lightroom to do this. There's some cloning tools available. I just find it more cumbersome than using Photoshop. I've used Photoshop for 25 years now, so I'm just used to it, and that's the way I like to work. So what I'm going to do is export this image. And I already have it set up to drop the image into that same folder for the tank, and it's going to automatically open this in Photoshop. Now it's telling me this file already exists because I already did create this file, so I'm going to say use the unique name. It's going to create a second image. But I really want to show you this because this is one of the things that really makes a big difference in the images and really cleans it up. So, all right, here we go. This can take a little time, but I think it's worth it. Right over here on the left toolbar is the clone tool. And there's a few different ones you can use. I tend to use the standard tool, which what you do is you kind of come over to an area, a clean area of the image. And if you hold down, I'm on the Mac, so hold down the Option key, see how it changes the cursor, and click in that area of the image. What that did is that took a sample of color and texture. And the important part here is the texture. So now when I come over to one of these lines, like we'll do this one right here, this is what I want to get rid of. And I click and drag over this image. Okay, it paints over it, but what it did was it uses this area around it. It picks up the color from around that area. It uses that color, but then it picked up the texture from where we clicked earlier and applied that texture. So it's matching texture and color to the surrounding areas. So anytime I want to, if I had to make a correction, say to the scales, I would have to come over here and again click and then make my correction to pick up the texture of the scales and match that texture versus the more smooth texture that's in the background. So what I'm going to do is click, and I'm just going to come over to every one of these areas that needs a little correction. You can see this is already looking a lot better. Oops, hit undo on that. Let's go back. Okay. So click, and then kind of erase or clone out these areas. Now, one other thing you can do if you're lazy, like selection tool, the lasso. And what you can do is I'll trace around the image of the fish. This is kind of an interesting little trick. Okay, so I've just got a quick selection of the fish. This is the area I do not want to affect. This is the area where, what I'm going to show you is kind of a way to blur out the background. So I've selected the fish, but that's the area I don't want to actually select. I want to select the background. So I come up to select now. I just say inverse. Okay, so now it's got the whole background selected. When I apply this effect, I don't want there to be a sharp transition from the effect area to the non-effect area. So if I come under select and I say modify and feather, this is going to kind of blur this line. Okay, so I say I'm going to blur it about 25 pixels worth. I don't want to blur it too much and then get into the actual fish area, so just kind of want to blur the transition area. And if come up here and I want to hide that selection, I'll just hit Command H so we can see. Okay, so it's still selected, you just can't see the actual selection right now. You come up to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Blurring is okay in this case because we want that soft background. And as you can see, it already got rid of most of that stuff. Here's no blur. This is where we were. And as I slide the slider, the more I slide it, the more it gets rid of that blur. We can go all the way and max blur there, but it gets a little funky. You start getting halos. So I try to find a point that's kind of, right where there might be still a little bit left, which I can take care of with the clone tool. But it got rid of most of it. So let's just say okay. And I might even want to leave some of those, but let's see. I don't like this one, these little kind of lines right by his face. Oh, we still have that selection. Let me get rid of that. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then we'll get rid of this one back here by the tail. And I'll leave a few of the other ones. And that's it. So at this point, image is done. I might go ahead and add the watermark that I like to add to my images here in Photoshop. And then I just export it or save it out of Photoshop as a JPEG and post it online. So I hope that gave you some idea of what I do with the images. It is more than just the camera and the camera settings. Lightroom really lets you take the image, give it your own personal touch, and just take it to its full potential, and you get to choose the settings. You get to make it look the way you see it in real life. You're not relying on the camera, and this is really how you get the most out of your images. I wish I could say it was easy as just choosing the right aperture and the right shutter speed on the camera. But with our tanks, man, that lighting is a killer. It really is hard to get the right white balance in camera. Anyway, I hope this helps and answer some questions. And please feel free to ask more. I'd be more than happy to do more videos. Some that are more focused, or even if it's just created too many questions, I'd be happy to redo it and include whatever suggestions you guys might have. All right, thanks a bunch. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you on the forums.